Welcome to Science in Your Shopping Cart, a new series that shows how science touches many of the products you buy at the grocery store, from new varieties of fruits and vegetables to technological advances that make your food safer, cheaper, and tastier. I'm Todd Silver. Plants are amazing resources for both life and our precious environment. It's no surprise that most of our food comes from plants, or that many of our modern medicines are derived from plants. Plants are also key ingredients for fuels, clothing, and shelter. But did you know that plants are used for producing tires, or that natural herbs found in your garden are excellent bug repellents? Today we're going to look at some pretty amazing plants, or as I like to call them, WonderPlants. No cape needed for these super greens. We start our journey just outside our nation's capital at the U.S. Arboretum. Over 400 acres of plants and gardens to visit.
And in that 446 acres, we have lots of different kinds of gardens. We have a world-class bonsai museum. We're in the National Herb Garden, conifers, native plants, azaleas. So there's pretty much something for everyone if you like gardening. So if you like color, palettes, you like textures, things like that. If you're a regular homeowner, I think you can get ideas on what you can do in your yard. So I would recommend for people to come and check us out.
I toured the Arboretum with Christine Moore, who's a horticulturist here. Christine's like a walking encyclopedia, or in these days, Wikipedia, when it comes to plants. The National Herb Garden has over 800 different kinds of plants, from corn to coffee, even Tabasco plants for those who like a little spice on their food. They even grow some plants that the rest of us would consider weeds.
One of the things I like about this garden so much is the plant diversity here. I mean, we grow everything from trees down to aquatics. And in that span, you can cover an awful lot of material on how plants are used around the world.
Take the chicory plant, for example. This purple flowering plant is probably known more as a ditchweed because you often see it in the grassy medians down highways. However, chicory has quite a history, especially for you Civil War buffs.
During the Civil War, the North was not able to get tobacco because it was cut off from the South, and the South was not able to get coffee from the North. Coffee was the main distribution center was in New York City. So you had these two sides of, the war going on, and people forget that the soldiers are still people too, and whatever conflict is going on in the government level, that doesn't mean that these people don't like each other necessarily. They could be sitting on, opposite sides of a battle line, but playing games with each other or something. So, the guys on one side have tobacco, the other guys don't. They'd really like it. The other ones have coffee. So they would trade things when they could. But in the absence of coffee, a lot of the soldiers would use chicory as a coffee substitute. So if you go to New Orleans, you'll often come across the Café du Monde. That's a big time, well-known place, and their coffee that they make there is made out of chicory.
You think you need your coffee before going to work? Well, these soldiers definitely needed their coffee before heading off to battle. So much so that one Civil War entrepreneur actually built a coffee grinder into the stock of his rifle.
So it was sort of almost like a Swiss Army knife type little thing that they could carry with them. So if you could get your coffee beans, you could just open this little hatch on the side of your gun, throw in some coffee beans, and just grind away. And then you could brew your coffee out on the battlefield. I just find that one of the most interesting stories about two plants, their relationships, the chicory and the coffee, and how they had an impact on just the everyday guy during the Civil War.
The coffee plant is well known for, coffee. But did you know the red coating on the outside of the bean is actually used for tea in some countries? And by the way, that's not actually a bean, but rather a seed. It can also be used as a dye. Did you know that caffeine can be removed from coffee and actually used in other products, such as cough syrup? We can go on and on about coffee. In fact, coffee could have its own podcast. Note to self. Well, let's head over to the industrial garden to learn about more wonder plants, such as cotton.
Cotton is extremely important the world over. Most people are used to white fibered cotton, but they also make a green fiber or lint cotton and brown. And what's nice about those different colored lintz or fibers from the cotton is that the color is color fast. So you've got a green t-shirt, a brown t-shirt, what have you, and the color's not going to fade like it would if you had synthetic dyes on there. Other than used for your typical cotton clothing or cotton balls or, Q-tips type thing like that, cotton has also been used in the past for making cellulose for movie films. Now we do things digitally, but if you're old enough to remember putting the film wheel on or film strips in school and things like that, the cellulose that comes from those fibers is what made that film strip there. It also makes cling wrap, so the stuff that you use to wrap up your food, that again made from cellulose, comes from plants like cotton. And not only the fiber type thing, but you can also recycle a lot of the fibers and use it as housing insulation. So some of the more environmentally friendly type companies will take old clothing that people aren't using, shred them up again in fibers, and then put them into fiberglass insulation, and they can use that in housing, and it's actually got a lot of good flame retardant abilities to it.
As we'll learn later in the podcast, cotton is a super strong material and has a lot of healing benefits. Processing cotton typically involves bleaching it, cleaning it repeatedly, and then stretching and brushing the fibers over and over until it becomes soft and smooth. The downside of this process is you lose some of the natural properties of the fiber in the cellulose. ARS researchers are looking at the properties of raw cotton fibers, which don't go through this process, to promote wound healing.
What they're finding is that it's really good for wound dressings for blood clotting, more so than a regular Band-Aid. And because of those increased capabilities for staunching wounds, they're looking at it for a lot of other industries like either military or first responders, things like that, where you might need immediate aid to staunch a massive wound on somebody, and regular cotton doesn't do as good a job as this new fabric does that actually retains some of its natural properties in the fiber.
Cotton has many other uses as well, including using its seed oil as a lubricant for car engines or factory machines.
To me, this is a plant that deserves the title of wonder plant because it does so many different things for thousands of years.
The industrial garden is a treasure trove for wonder plants, such as corn, sugar, and soy. Although not present in the garden, hemp is a wonder plant that's being rediscovered as a major commodity because of its diversity, not only in clothing and textiles, but for so many industrial uses.
Thomas Jefferson was the one that said everybody should be growing hemp because it has such great virtues, whether it's a fiber, or used for cordage, and it grows fast, it's stronger than cotton. So even for marine uses, whether you're talking big ships, yachts or something, using it to tie in, or your little boat or what have you, it just lasts so much longer when exposed to the elements. It's sad that for a long time it was sort of stigmatized, but now I think we're starting to recapture what Jefferson knew about this plant.
Okay, we're moving along now to the dye garden and taking a look at the mullein plant. This looks like a weed in your garden. It has low hanging leaves and sprouts up thin and tall, almost like a corn stalk. But it's strong enough that European colonists would dip the ends of the plant in wax and use it as a torch. The fuzzy leaves were used as bandaging material. So what's this plant or weed doing in the dye garden?
It's here in the dye garden because various parts are used to dye fabrics, but it's also used medicinally, and the whole plant can be used from the flowers down to the roots. The flowers are really anti-inflammatory and are often used to make an ear oil for ear infections. It's combined with like olive oil and garlic, which is also very antimicrobial and anti-inflammatory, as a good ear combo for infections. The leaves are used in teas for if you have a bad cough. It helps to soothe the cough. I love weeds that you can use all the parts of, and the fact that they're weedy and they just grow everywhere is amazing to me. It's just like medicine that you can go out and pick and don't have to worry about it, and nothing goes to waste.
That's Erin Holden, a horticulturist at the Arboretum and resident medicinal plant expert on herbs. Make sure you check out our Facebook premiere, where Erin takes questions about all the amazing remedies that come from herbs you can grow in your garden. But today we're talking about your non-traditional uses for plants. And for our next plant, we're moving on to the colonial garden.
This is Salvia scleria, or clary sage. We're in the colonial garden, but I'm going to talk more about its industrial uses, and it's something I just learned about relatively recently. It's got a really fascinating backstory to it. One of my professors from herb school sent me a picture of hundreds of acres of clary sage in some rural area in North Carolina, and she had no idea what this thing was, so she asked me if I might have any idea. We pinpointed that it was clary sage, and she was like, why is this random place in the middle of nowhere, North Carolina, growing hundreds of acres of clary sage? So that kind of inspired us to do a little bit more digging.
Aaron learned that back in the 60s, a large tobacco company was anticipating a shortage of Oriental tobacco, which was added to their cigarette blends. They found that clary sage had similar properties, and they began planting hundreds of acres of this perennial plant near one of their tobacco factories in North Carolina. It turns out the shortage of Oriental tobacco never happened, and after a few years the company shut down the factory and abandoned the clary sage fields.
And then a few other things kind of popped up that spurred the industry along. The perfume industry was looking for an alternative to ambergris, which is made in the GI tract of sperm whales. It's like a fixative in the perfume industry, but they outlawed it in the US because it was not sustainable, it was dangerous for the sperm whales, for people harvesting it. So the perfume industry was looking for an alternative for that in the 70s, and then coupled with the kind of detergent agency looking for alternatives to phosphates in their products. And so they switched to an enzyme-based solution which cleans clothes really well, but it makes them smell kind of gross. So they were trying to find ways to add fragrance to them and have the fragrance last. Enter clary sage again. It was kind of a perfect storm of things. So what they discovered is clary sage contains an extract called sclereol, and then you process that a little bit further to sclereolide, and that causes fragrances to linger for days on end. So it's used in a lot of detergents and dryer sheets and things like that to keep your clothes smelling really nice for a really long time. And it's also used in the perfume industry for the same reason. So when you put on a perfume, it doesn't just volatilize and go away after a few minutes, it kind of sticks to your skin.
Today, clary sage is distributed around the world for its long-lasting fragrant qualities, and much of it is still grown in those North Carolina fields where it once was thought to be a substitute for Oriental tobacco. Just a tip if you're thinking of growing clary sage at home, the plant itself can have a rather unpleasant odor, so you may need some of those fragrant dryer sheets to mask the smell. Let's move on. It's no secret that non-biodegradable plastic containers have a serious environmental impact. They fill up our landfills without the ability to break down, and there are health concerns with the plastics leaching into our ground and contaminating our soil and water.
Welcome, is this order for carryout?
Single-use plastic containers are used everywhere, from carry-out dinners to small merchandise holders. Fortunately, both consumers and businesses have a growing interest in single-use containers made from renewable materials. What we're talking about here is a container made from plant fibers that can be discarded in a composter. Does that sound too good to be true? Well, not to researchers at ARS like Dr. Gregory Glenn, who works at the Bioproducts Research Facility in Albany, California.
I'm dating myself here, but my family, we probably would go out to eat maybe once a month, if that. And if you look at today's families, there are a significant number of consumers are now eating outside of the home, and fast food is very popular, very convenient. And so the need for biodegradable, compostable, single-use containers is more important now than it has ever been. And the goal ultimately is to get to the point where you go to a fast food place, all of the waste in that bag can be thrown into a composting facility and it all gets composted. We're getting there step by step. It's a challenging problem, but we're making progress.
To succeed in this great endeavor, we need to look to our past to see how we got here. Over 75 years ago, food containers were mostly paper-based. Compostable, yes, but they were also flimsy, they were unable to handle high temperatures, and they deteriorated quickly when they got wet. The plastics industry started developing containers that were sturdier, could be heated in a microwave, and could hold liquids. And over time, they became cheaper and faster to produce, enabling them to accommodate the demands of a booming fast food and takeout industry. Fast forward to today, and plastics continue to dominate the single container food use market. But it comes at a high price for both the environment and our health.
If you think about plastics, they are an amazing material. I mean, you simply heat it up and squeeze it into a mold, whatever shape you want, and as soon as it cools off, it's solid and it looks nice. And it's moisture and oil resistant. It's a very fast process. The world was very good at developing that technology, and to compete with that is a real challenge. But the fact that we can use agricultural materials, they're cheaper than oil, and a lot of people would say, well, okay, if the materials are cheaper, why can't you produce a cheaper product? Well, it's not just the materials, it's also the process. The problem that we have with the processes that we're working with is that the equipment has to be customized a little bit. So you can't just take existing technology off the shelf, the processing equipment that works so well with plastics, and simply apply that to our situation. So that's kind of a long way of telling you that it's a complicated story, and the processing is a significant cost that has to be considered in the overall cost of the product.
The short way of saying that is the plastic industry has a 75-year head start on making these pieces, and plastics make really good parts in a hurry. And we have to custom make the equipment that makes these biomass into plastic products. So we have some catching up to do.
That's Dr. William Orts, research leader at the Bioproducts Research Facility. Doctors Orts and Glenn have developed a pulp molding process that has garnered a lot of interest in the container industry. The process begins with an organic mixture of plant starch fibers that becomes dried into this large sheet. Now these sheets can be stored until ready for molding. Then you simply cut the sheet into the size you need, you hydrate it, and it becomes pliable enough that you can then mold it into this one-time use plate or bowl that's completely compostable.
Another technology that we have an interest in is trying to replace polystyrene containers. So if you've ever gone to a takeout restaurant and you'll find that there might be 3 or 4 of these polystyrene containers that contain your food. Some states have banned these containers because polystyrene is very slow to degrade in the environment. We've been working with a technology for foaming fiber, plant fiber, into a foam that can be molded to make foam sheets so they can be used as insulative panels, for instance. And so this technology looks promising.
Doctors Orts and Glenn have several patents for processes for turning plant-based compositions into single-use containers, and they are currently working with industry partners to produce these environmentally friendly products on a mass scale. As previously mentioned, there's still hurdles to overcome, mainly producing these containers at a price similar to their plastic competitors, and making sure they're equally or even superior in functionality. They have to be sturdy, heat-resistant, and stand up to liquids and oils without quickly deteriorating.
Very challenging problems to address, but we do feel like we have made some progress in this area, and we're working with an industrial partner that sells a lot of compostable products, and working with them and trying to commercialize these new technologies.
Dr. Glenn is also working with industry partners on producing corn-based single-use utensils, such as forks, knives, and spoons, that are sturdy, heat-stable, and have a long shelf life. These green utensils are fully compostable and already available on the market, so keep an eye out for them.
In some ways, we're going back to the future. We're going back to these pulp-based products, but we're trying to do it better that matches the properties of something like styrofoam. And it's a big issue for single-use items like a plastic fork and knife you might use for 5 minutes, and then it could end up as litter or just in a landfill for the next 100 years.
We've talked a lot about the environmental impact of these plastics, which are not biodegradable and end up in our landfills and water streams. But just as important is the health aspect. Many paper containers, not only in food containers, but other commercial products, they contain coatings comprised of forever chemicals, which are named that way because they're even more difficult to break down than plastics. And what's worse, they're released into the environment and end up in our soils, our waterways, and our food supplies. Several state and local jurisdictions, along with parts of the European Union, have already banned the use of forever chemicals.
Every American, basically every person in the world, has a certain concentration of these compounds in their blood serum. And it raised a lot of concerns. Are these compounds going to cause long-term health effects? So the idea is, okay, let's start looking at ways to replace these forever chemicals. We're using biodegradable materials instead.
By replacing forever chemicals in plastic food containers and utensils with organic compositions comprised of plant fibers and polymers such as corn syrup, we can drastically improve the sustainability of the single-use food container industry and provide new biodegradable products from food waste.
Let's hit the road!
For this next story, we're going to hit the streets, where the rubber meets the road, get back on track, try to drive 55. Well, you get the picture. We're talking about cars, and specifically, tires. We find tires in just about every mode of transportation, from jet planes to automobiles to scooters. Most tires today are a blend of natural and synthetic rubber, along with metal and other components. A good portion of these components are imported from other countries. But ARS researchers have moved on the fast track to develop tires made from a domestic plant that actually grows in a climate more associated with camels than cars.
The Waiuli plant is a desert shrub. It looks like the burning bush in the Moses movie. So it's a woody shrub. It's really remarkable. In the context of WonderPlants, Waiuli survives, even thrives at very, very high temperatures with very, very little water. It's desert adapted. It's one of the amazing things about it, and one of the reasons why in an era we have now of increasing drought that it's particularly of interest as an alternative crop in areas where less and less irrigation water is available.
That's Dr. Colleen McMahon, research chemist with ARS's Western Regional Research Center Bioproducts Research Unit in Albany, California. She's talking about the Waiuli plant, which doesn't sound at all like it's written, by the way. Waiuli? Anyway, a little background. Waiuli is mainly found in the southwestern United States. It's native to Mexico and was used for a variety of applications by the Mesoamericans and the Mayans. As Dr. McMahon mentioned, Waiuli has amazing drought adaptability, which we'll dive into later on in the podcast. But right now, we're talking tires. You may be surprised to learn that the Waiuli plant was actually used for tires on some of the first automobile models over 100 years ago.
It was first used in industrial products at the turn of the 20th century when the Intercontinental Rubber Company actually used it for tires in some very early Ford model cars. So it was used at that time. And then again during World War II, when imported rubber was embargoed and the United States had a crisis, the United States government, specifically the United States Department of Agriculture, invested a lot of effort in identifying and finding plants that make rubber, in developing Waiuli as a source of natural rubber, and it was used at that time. During the Arab oil embargo, it again moved forward into commercialization and in small-scale commercialization. But once the petroleum-based rubber was available cheaply and imports of natural rubber tree rubber were available cheaply, then the effort was discontinued yet again.
As interest in plant-based tires waned, researchers looked at other uses for the rubber plant, including as a safe, natural alternative to latex products in the medical field. However, Dr. McMahon still saw a lot of value in the Waiuli plant as a new commodity crop for the United States, so she re-engaged with the tire industry. The Department of Energy was also interested in Waiuli-based tires because at the time, rubber and petroleum prices were once again moving upward. In the early 2000s, ARS partnered with US-based Cooper Tire.
Cooper was very concerned about their natural rubber supplies and about their ability to be able to procure natural rubber from areas, equatorial areas, tropical areas where they were forced to get it from. They really wanted to see a domestic source. In the BRDI project, we developed the first ever Waiule genome. We developed the first ever sustainability model for Waiule, made some important studies in terms of the biochemistry, important studies in agronomy.
Cooper Tire applied ARS's research in developing a 100% Waiule tire, finally proving that with modern tire design, rubber from this plant could meet the technical requirements of a passenger tire. ARS then partnered with Bridgestone America, who invested in research farms and pilot plants to improve and increase the natural rubber content of the Waiule plant. And today, ARS researchers partner with many tire companies to turn this wonder plant into a reliable, sustainable, and technologically superior tire. Besides the domestic incentives to using Waiule, there are a number of environmental benefits that the plant-based tire has over its synthetic competitors. According to ARS researcher Mariana Resendez, tire test results showed Waiule tire production created a lower environmental impact and produced lower gas emissions, and the tire itself demonstrated improved fuel economy. And by supplying the American tire industry with a domestic product, there's less of an environmental strain compared to the transport of imported products.
Also, if you think about like the life of the plant or where it traveled to, right? There's a lot of emissions spent on just shipping rubber to the United States. If we have this domestic rubber source, it's here. We don't have to move it anywhere.
I think the idea is to increase the bio-based content of tires and other goods and other products. And there is often an accompanying positive environmental impact from that. We're not looking at replacing all of the imported rubber or all of the petroleum-based rubber. That's not likely to happen anytime soon. But what we're really interested in is supply security. One of the things we all learned during 2020 was that supplies of critical raw materials can be threatened. And today we're still suffering from supply chain issues and shortages of things like personal protective equipment, gloves, raw materials for tires, and those sort of things. So even if we could supply 10% of our own needs domestically, it would have a big impact in terms of security of that supply.
Waste is another issue when it comes to crop commercialization. And with Waiule, there's hardly any waste because the entire plant is grinded down and then the rubber's extracted. The rest of the finely ground plant could be used as biofuel, an adhesive, even guarding your house against termites and cockroaches.
There's dozens of possible applications for the resins. I can't overstress how remarkable Waiule is.
As Dr. McMahon mentioned earlier, the plant is also being studied for its amazing climate adaptability. The Waiule plant grows in the desert, under extreme drought conditions, and with climate change becoming an ever-increasing reality for our farmers, new insights into dry cropping, deficit irrigation, and other water-limited farming techniques can help ensure a sustainable food supply for our future.
These deficit irrigation experiments are really important and are teaching us a lot about the plant. Our colleague came to work from the southeastern U.S. where they have lots of water, and he came to work at Maricopa, and he said, I couldn't understand the fuss over this Waiule and, why it really mattered. He goes, then I was out there on a 110-degree day, and I saw this thing growing, and it was like, you got to be kidding. Yeah, we need to figure this out. We really do. We need to understand why this crop can survive and produce an important commodity.
Superheroes are all the craze nowadays. When I grew up, we had superhero comic books, but today there's blockbuster movies, animations, video shorts, TV series, even conventions. One thing I know about superheroes is you need a really good suit, something durable, super strong. It could even help heal wounds. Capes are optional. What we're talking about here is a product made from a fiber that when highly spun is actually stronger than steel. Of course, it also has to be breathable and functional. What's amazing about this fiber is that it doesn't come from another planet, and it's not fiction, it's real as a cotton plant.
Nanofibers are an amazing material. The reason they are so unique is that they have so much surface area that's exposed. So if you take a fiber and maybe it's 1 millimeter and you take it down to a micron in thickness, you dramatically increase the surface area. And that's important because it opens up new applications, new uses that people have not thought of before or didn't have at their disposal.
Nanofibers can be made from a variety of materials, including plastics, woods, or plants. Researchers are finding that cotton and other plants can be spun into remarkably strong nanofibers. You may not know it, but nanofibers are already being used in mask filters, wound dressings, and other medical applications, as well as clothing. For the masks, the nanofibers have a small charge on their surface, so they can attract or attach charged particles, whether it's dust or viruses. But despite their strong woven fibers, the masks are still breathable.
That's a huge advantage to be able to have the air pass through, but still those fibers are able to attract and stick to whatever particles there are in the air and offer that protection.
Nanofibers are typically made through a technique called electrospinning. This is where a liquid polymer is pushed through a tube at high voltage. When it comes out of the tube, the air dries it into a fiber. The process stretches the liquid polymer into billions, sometimes trillions, of these thin nanofibers. The problem with this technique is twofold. First, it relies on static electricity, charging polymer solutions with high voltage electricity so they build up a big charge, and then use that electrical charge to drive the solution through skinny needles. The nanofibers that result are really useful, but the high voltage could be dangerous and expensive to scale up. Drs. Glenn and Orts worked with Brazilian scientists to find a more economical and safer technique to produce nanofibers. They designed an air pressure nozzle that relies on pressure drops instead of voltage drops to blow spin their nanofibers out of skinny needles. This technique is scalable because it doesn't need the high voltage, and they can make the filters more selective because they don't rely on static electricity. Selectivity is based upon chemical changes made to the polymer.
When compared with electrospinning, the fibers were comparable. It's a technique that can be much more easily scaled up. It's safer because you don't have to use a lot of electrical potentials. There's no electrical hazard involved. And it's more versatile in that you can use a lot of different solvents to make it, a lot of different types of polymers. In some cases, you want a biopolymer. In other cases, you may not. But the fact that you can use this technique and scale up the production using an air-based system rather than electrical potential system really opens up the possibility of new commercial applications.
These amazing nanofibers are becoming increasingly popular in the medical field for a variety of applications, including as a bandage spray to help soothe burns on the skin. The fibers have shown to help the skin regenerate and promote healing. Cotton-based nanofibers are becoming popular in nutraceuticals as high-fiber carriers of vitamins and essential oils. But the team is looking to lower their cost so they can be used in commodity applications, like reinforcing plastics. Dr. Orts adds that the cellulose found in cotton is stronger than steel, which to me essentially ends the whole Superman versus Spider-Man argument.
When I think of these nanofibers, I think of spider silk. So what we've been trying to do is mimic what a spider does. Think how thin that fiber is and yet really strong, and how easily a spider can spin it out. And so what we're trying to do is match what a spider can do with polymer solutions that are generally green, that have high surface area.
Let's take a break and talk about some really annoying pests. Mosquitoes, houseflies, and other insects can be a real pain in the neck, sometimes literally. There are over 120,000 types of flies around the world, and 3,000 different species of mosquitoes. Some flies and mosquitoes can transmit pathogens that carry different diseases, but most are harmless, albeit very annoying. Mosquitoes can make life miserable outside during the summer, and there's nothing more irritating than having flies in your house. ARS researchers are not immune to the itching, scratching, and biting from these pests, and I've been working on developing natural remedies to repel flies, mosquitoes, and other bugs. The purple Cufia is a beautiful annual flower that can be grown just about anywhere that offers full or partial sun. Aside from its brilliant appearance, it can also help fight off pests. In Peoria, Illinois, researchers are converting fatty acids from the oil seed of the purple Cufia into an effective insect repellent. The sweet scent of honeysuckle may be pleasing to humans, but this perennial flowering vine also packs a powerful punch when it comes to knocking out the larvae of mosquitoes. ARS laboratory studies in Peoria found that essential oils in Italian honeysuckle killed 100% of the mosquito larvae. Sweet and potent, and that's my type of honeysuckle. The visual appeal of cedar wood makes it a popular product for fences, decks, and furniture. But did you know that cedarwood oil is harmful to houseflies, ticks, and mosquitoes? It can also be made into a natural wood preservative that deters termites. Xylitol and erythritol are artificial sweeteners that are safe for human consumption. But are they safe for houseflies that like the taste as well? Not so much. ARS researchers in Gainesville, Florida, found that these sweeteners can be toxic to several species of adult flies. Pineapple weed has long been used as an insect repellent by indigenous people of North America. But how effective was this annual plant? ARS researchers in Oxford, Mississippi, conducted tests and found that essential oil from dried pineapple weed deterred mosquitoes from biting as effectively as popular bug repellents. Let's hop back in the car and head back to Albany, California. After all, this is a pretty cool lab, and you'll never know what inventions you'll find here. Earlier in the podcast, we showed you a performance tire comprised of the WonderPlant Waiuli. Let's stick with the car theme and talk about clean energy, such as the hydrogen fuel cell technology. According to the Department of Energy, a fuel cell uses the chemical energy of hydrogen or other fuels to cleanly and efficiently produce electricity. With hydrogen fuel cells, the only products are electricity, water, and heat. One of the challenges for producing these fuel cells for cars and trucks is capturing and storing hydrogen on a mass scale. Dr. Orton and his collaborators are developing a large filter-type application that could capture and then store hydrogen as well as other components for energy purposes.
You can make a high surface area kind of porous mesh that picks up hydrogen selectively. If you've picked up the hydrogen, you can store the hydrogen. And then you might change the chemistries, change the conditions, change the temperature, and the hydrogen that you store, you release when needed. An air filter becomes a hydrogen storage device and becomes a hydrogen sink that you can use in a fuel cell.
Think about the furnace filter in your basement. It allows air to pass through, but it traps dust and other particles, which keeps these allergens from floating all over your house. Now imagine that when the filter gets full of particles, you could pull them off the filter and use them as an energy source.
If that were a really selective filter, a lot of air would go through and it would pick out the hydrogen molecules as best as it can. And so you'd have a concentrated array of hydrogen on that surface. If you've got a lot of surface area, you can pick up a lot of hydrogen in that filter, in that mesh. And then you reverse the filter activity. So whatever you did to collect the hydrogen, you somehow reverse that activity and it becomes a hydrogen source.
Dr. Orton and his collaborators are building these filters out of agricultural waste, such as discarded almond shells. The shells are heat activated and turned into a carbon substance called biochar, which is completely organic. The biochar is then turned into what is called activated carbon, which enables it to trap and hold gases like hydrogen and other substances. This technology holds great potential for the hydrogen fuel cell market, but it also holds promise for other sources, including capturing and storing a major greenhouse gas before it releases into the atmosphere.
Methane is 25 to 30 times worse as a greenhouse gas than CO2. So every landfill puts out methane, wastewater treatment facilities put out methane, and definitely manure ponds. This is where you want to capture greenhouse gases and don't let them out. Then you either want to use them, say, to generate electricity or any other chemistries you want to do with that methane. So you want to catch it, treat it as a sink, and then once it's concentrated, use it as a green material or green electricity.
Dr. Orts is currently working with a manufacturing company to more efficiently trap and store methane in wastewater treatment plants and then convert the gas into bioplastics. The filter technology could be used broadly to help keep greenhouse gases out of the atmosphere while providing a renewable energy source for the future.
First, you're taking the methane or hydrogen or greenhouse gases out of an airstream, greenhouse gases that don't end up as a greenhouse gas pollutant, and then you're going to use them later in some kind of efficient green process. So it's a double positive.
On the Mount Rushmore of WonderPlants, that is plants that have a wide array of uses, you have cotton, which we already talked about. You have corn, which goes into just about everything, from syrups and oils to fuels and polymers. I think you have to put soy up there as well. Let's take out the fact that soy sauce is one of my favorite condiments and look at its non-food uses, such as in candles, crayons, biodiesel, particle board, lubricants, and believe it or not, in different parts of the car you're driving right now. In fact, soy in car parts dates back nearly 100 years.
Henry Ford was a huge investor in the soybean industry, and he was always trying to figure out what other ways can we use soy besides just your normal food sort of application. He spent a lot of money funding scientist research, and even today that research has developed into creating foam for car seats and even the door insulations.
That's Christine Moore, a horticulturist at the U.S. Arboretum. Car manufacturers are also using soy for their hoses and wiring, as well as in their fuel tanks. But they're not the only fans of the soy wonder plant. ARS researchers have been developing new varieties of soy for decades. Between 1980 and 1994 alone, ARS scientists released 66 varieties and 280 breeding lines of soy. These new varieties help soybean farmers get their product into newspapers, lipsticks, plastics, flooring, paints, and stain removing cleaners.
The new and upcoming thing is soy-based foam insulation. So you'll see home reno shows where they're spraying all this stuff into the walls. And that's another, again, sort of an eco-friendly of sorts way of using soy. And again, that's one of those things that, different industries will look at the characteristics or properties of different plants and determine whether it's useful for their industry. It's another plant that I feel like is underappreciated as a wonder plant because, again, it goes from farm to table to industry.
ARS scientists continue to research the soybean plant, looking to improve its nutritional quality, as well as learn how stress factors such as drought and heat affect the plant's ability to flower. Researchers are also breeding new lines to tailor soy-based products for just about every market, from bioplastics to polymers to manufacturing parts. With all this variety, soy certainly has its place on the Mount Rushmore of wonder plants. Thanks for listening to this WonderPlant edition of Science in Your Shopping Cart. Stay tuned for future podcasts. And in case you missed it, check out our other podcasts on our website or our YouTube channel. For Science in Your Shopping Cart, I'm Todd Silver.
Science in Your Shopping Cart is produced by the Office of Communications, Agricultural Research Service, an agency of the U.S. Department of Agriculture. For more information, visit www.ars.usda.gov. Follow us on Twitter, LinkedIn, and Instagram, like us on Facebook, and watch us on YouTube.